Greetings from Groningen. My name is Jan-Jaap Reinders. I'm a work and organizational psychologist, and I investigate interprofessional identity from a psychological point of view since the past 15 years. So today I'm going to share some insights, some empirical findings with regard to this social construct. Interprofessional identity with regard to its theoretical foundations and empirical evidence. The urgency and justification for interprofessional collaboration is very much related to how we mostly work worldwide. Most of it we are used to is multi-professional collaboration. And we are perfecting working together apart. So on the left-hand side, you see how content, process, and social is absolutely not aligned. We are learning in isolated spaces, which of course is very important, because you also need to create your own role clarity from your own professional point of view. However, we also require unity with regard to the effectiveness of, for instance, clinical intervention, which requires content unity. We also require process unity, looking at digital infrastructure, maybe protocols and guidelines, but also interprofessional competencies on how we can align between different perspectives. And another thing is with regard to social unity. So the focus of today is this part, interprofessional identity, and how this contributes to the unity between different professions, not based on their content, not based on their field of expertise, not based on the process, but based on purely psychological processes and the science of identification. So, to further elaborate on what interprofessional identity is that you first have to know that from a psychological point of view, we have multiple social identities. We all have many memberships, and this is very much related. So either you are in real life, you're a father maybe, or a mother, you're an athlete, you have many different roles, many different memberships. And the psychological association with the membership is referred to in psychology as a social identity. Well, this definition was first introduced in 1978 by Teifel. Very important also because he was also one of the scholars who, together with Turner, developed the theory the social identity theory, which is very popular and very important within interprofessional education and collaborative practice. If we look at the left-hand side, we see in this example multiple social identities. And in the middle, we see context. And context is how we interpret our environment. So context itself is not the same as environment. It's only the selection of the parts of the stimuli or situations that we can recognize, and this becomes context. So context is the result of how we interpret the environment that we are in. And based on this context, this triggers or activates a social identity relevant for that context. And because we are socialized within that specific social role or social identity, we also know how we should behave. And therefore, on the right-hand side, you see motivated action that after recognizing those contextual cues, you actually are acting upon them based on the social identity that is motivated at that moment. However, I just refer to Teifel and Turner. And Teifel and Turner introduced in 1979 the social identity theory. The social identity theory, as I said, is very popular and very important to understand interprofessional learning and working. It explains how we perceive in-groups and out-groups, how we identify with our own group, and at the same time how we perceive outsiders. And this is also problematic because in-group, out-group mechanism, as described by Tyfel and Turner, also results in less social, non-collaborative behaviors. In an fMRI study, there's several fMRI studies in 2018, but also meta-analysis in 2021, they confirmed that actually we have a specific brain response to outsiders. And this is showing less empathy, even emotional rejection. And also the amygdala is more activated, which is very much aligned with threat detection. And of course, this is not helpful. In work in organizational psychology, there are numerous publications that confirm that group cohesion, which is of course very much related to being part of the same group, is very much an emotional thing. So not emotional rejection, but emotional attachment. And this is one of the main predictors of high team performance. So of course this is problematic because everybody does belong to another professional group when you are working together on complex problems. To understand this, or to overcome this problem of in-group, out-group, in Groningen we have developed a new theory, a psychological theory on how to create an interprofessional in-group, or in this case an interprofessional identity, which is actually in this case the same because an in-group is the group you identify with. So if people from other professions are also members of your in-group, it is less likely that you will experience emotional rejection and you will also experience more empathy because of that, which is very helpful because this will should result in more group cohesion. And group cohesion is a great predictor of performance. Of course, because it's a theory, it needs to be tested. And the extended professional identity theory helps to understand how interprofessional identity is as a construct, but also how it's formed, how it's activated. And this is all based on theoretical propositions. In turn, these theoretical propositions are the basis for scientific hypotheses that we can test in science. So, related to the first theoretical proposition is that interprofessional identity has a different whom. It has a different primary group, different motivation, different processes, and of course also at the end different outcomes because it has a different purpose. Any professional identity is always distinct related to a professional group, and therefore one professional identity is not the same as the other when we compare different professions. Interprofessional identity is an identity we can jointly develop. So it's very important to understand we are not talking about professional identity, we're talking about a new kind of social identity that applies to professions who want to work interprofessionally. Related to other theoretical propositions of EPIT, of this theory, is that we have multiple identities, as I pointed out, which are investigated a lot within psychology. Problem is that the connection between social identity theory of Tyfel and Turner is not connected to another tradition within psychology, and this is complementary even though it is a completely separate field of identity research. And this is based on intrapersonal processes. So social identity theory of Tyfel and Turner are more focused on how people from different professions or different group interact with one another based on their membership and based on their identity. When there's friction, there is potential competition or even conflict. But the same is true for intrapersonal. So intrapersonal identity processes means that sometimes contexts that actually trigger your social identity sometimes overlap. In that case, you have to choose which one is more important to you, and this is referred to as identity hierarchy. And this is very personal because, of course, we do not have the same memberships, and of course, you have different beliefs, different personality, and different personal identity. So it's not always clear-cut. However, some identities can be complementary. And according to self-categorization theory of Turner from 1987, we have widening circles of group membership. So compare this to your cultural identity, for instance, which is much bigger. It's a region, or it's maybe even it's a country, or even beyond. And from generation to generation, you have learned how to interpret the context in your region and how to interact with other people. This, of course, has implications on how you behave and what's normal. So this also means that there is an interaction between that identity, your cultural identity, for instance, but also your interprofessional identity and your professional identity. And therefore, we can see nuances that even though we do recognize one another, even if you're, for instance, an OT and you go abroad, you meet people from other countries, you do notice that there are cultural differences. However, at the same time, because you share this professional identity, you also recognize the way you think, and you feel committed. You feel like you are part of the same group. And this really matters because this also creates cohesion within your profession. Whether you're an OT or a psychologist or any other profession. So the interprofessional identity is complementary because it is focused not just on combining any kind of expertise. The diversity is inherently part of that concept, and therefore it's also complementary and can coexist but also be co-activated during a context that requires both your professional expertise as well as interprofessional collaboration, because true knowledge is knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know, and therefore you need other people and other perspectives because everybody has got blind spots. So looking at empirical support of the EPIT-based interprofessional identity, it is the only fully validated psychological theory with regard to interprofessional identity and identity related to interprofessional collaboration. If we look at the social construct, the measure, then we can see that its validity and reliability is confirmed in 8 countries. Also with the structure of this construct, it's 3 dimensions: interprofessional belonging, interprofessional commitment, and interprofessional beliefs. Furthermore, of course, you need to develop or to form such an identity, and we have also confirmed this in several countries in very different contexts, also cultural contexts, like Hong Kong, like Switzerland, the Netherlands, and soon there are more publications like Norway. We also have findings in Turkey, so in Indonesia, a lot of confirmation that we can actually deliberately develop an interprofessional identity with interprofessional education. Last but not least is the activation. And of course, that's the action mode. If you go into practice, do you behave accordingly, according to your interprofessional identity when it is necessary, when you find the context that there is a complex problem that you cannot solve alone? You need other people to do so. So this is based very much on contextual cues. I will tell you a bit more about that later. But activation is also confirmed. There are specific cues within our context that are interprofessional and therefore will activate an interprofessional identity once it is very strong. And this is replicated and both confirmed and replicated in the Netherlands. So comparing interprofessional identity formation with building a house. So entitativity is the first step, which is a very maybe complex word, but this is based on a theory that was first introduced in 1958 by Campbell. Entitativity is not the same as a dimension. It means that a group is considered psychologically as a social entity by you as an observer. So if you are an outsider, you want to be a member of a group, you need this foundation. Well, the same is true in the metaphor of building a house. The foundation of the house is not the house itself, but you do need a foundation to build the house. So the second real step is after establishing entitativity, you can really start building your interprofessional identity. And this is, of course, becoming part of that group. And this is referred to as belonging, interprofessional belonging. Interests are not readily social emotional connectedness, but this is the start. Becoming part of something doesn't mean that you are fully committed from the very first moment. That's number 3. So if you look at the house and you have built the house, there are different reasons to belong. And quite often in interprofessional education, some people have intrinsic motivation, others have extrinsic motivation. If you do have only extrinsic motivation and a low interprofessional identity, you actually need mandatory interprofessional education. And we can see that in studies. There's a lot of variation at the start of interprofessional education programs. If they are mandatory, you see more variation because there are some people who just have to do that. You know, it's mandatory, but that they don't really think interprofessionally yet. However, with the right conditions, we can use interprofessional education to really develop an interprofessional identity under the right conditions. And what we see at the end, even in mandatory interprofessional education programs, that we see a very big change with those with low interprofessional identification at the beginning, which is very promising, of course, because we can also replicate that. Interprofessional commitment is something else. Because that's the next step. You want those connections to evolve. You want to have more strong connectedness, interconnectedness. So you need positive emotions, more social contact. And last but not least, you need interprofessional beliefs. So if you look at the house, just like a house, it has a purpose. When a house has a purpose, it has different rooms. It has different functionalities. The same is true for any social identity. In this case, it's leveraging the diversity of perspective and expertise of various professions within a certain setting that you share. So you solve shared problem domains. So to further elaborate on the fundamental condition, the entitativity, that it's a foundation. So if you look on the left-hand side in this infographic, you can see that people, when they are outsiders, they are observing whether or not a collection of individuals really seems to be a group. And if they are a group, like a mixed profession group, you can become part of it. And that's on the right-hand side. So you have two perceptions on whether or not you are part of an entity. If you look at daily life, you can see that when you look at the bus stop and you see a collection of individuals waiting for the bus, you also look at those people, and most of the time you will conclude that they do not belong to one another. They're not part of the same group, so you cannot be part of that. So people waiting for the bus mostly have, as a collection of individuals, a very low entitativity. So entitativity enables interprofessional belonging and thus eventually commitment and beliefs as related to interprofessional identity. Looking at entitativity might also, it has symptoms like it has antecedents. So if you look at entitativity, you might wonder, why do I believe that this collection of individuals are actually a group, are actually a social unit? Well, there are some deviations. One of them is proximity, one of the antecedents. There are more antecedents, but proximity is very much culturally dependent. So it might be that depending on the social emotional connectedness, you have very different expectations about what a group is, depending on the distance people have when they communicate to one another. And this distance in all countries is the most largest distance when this social emotional connectedness is very low. So culture is very much context dependent, not your ability to belong. So we also see that in a study of a cross-cultural psychology study from 2017. We can see that the proximity is varying per culture, but also social emotional connectedness. And the red circle you can see on the right-hand side is a very specific deviation. In this case, that's Norway. Among 42 countries, and of course it's not complete. It's 42 countries, but you can see the deviation. That the distance between people when talking with their close friends is the smallest in Norway when you compare them to other 41 countries. So it's a very big variation with regard to that, different patterns of behavior, very much related to cultural values. So this also means that this has probably implications for how fast you can facilitate this entitativity with interprofessional education in different cultures. But there's a lot of research that is required to find that out. It's very new. Another example as an observer you can see during lunchtime is entitativity, is that most people during lunchtime, they show voluntary behavior. And in the work environment, you quite often see that people who work together sit together. So they probably have the same social identity. This is social identity behavior. And quite often, like in the hospital, you can see that those are different professional groups. So IP implications it has implications with regard to entitativity for IPE. You can create the impression of entitativity, and there's more than one way. But it's very important to be more effective in how to create a common ground, a common group, where you can build together an interprofessional identity. Assignments can help, teaching, but also role modeling. These are just a couple of examples. Interprofessional belonging can even be pinpointed with fMRI studies. We can see the brain responses in various areas, and the most specific area, and this is from a meta-analysis of 50 fMRI studies, brain imaging, where we can see that the dorsal medial prefrontal cortex is activated specifically for in-group members. So it's a really real thing. This area is not activated when you perceive somebody as an out-group member. So interprofessional belonging is very real. It can be facilitated. However, even though we know there are different brain areas, we know that how people act is very much related to this belonging. Belonging is not the whole story. You can also belong to a group of hooligans. It doesn't mean that you want people to behave that way. Interprofessional identity is not that kind of identity. It is associated with different behaviors. So if you want this to strengthen and you want different behaviors, you also need commitment and you need beliefs. So the belonging, as I told before, mandatory courses will be more effective because elective courses quite often are a self-selection of people with high interprofessional identity, because this is a source of motivation. If we look at interprofessional commitment, it's important that we have social contact. We see several studies that social contact is very important. Social deprivation with other with other professions. Interprofessional deprivation can lower this commitment. So we see higher interprofessional commitment as an identity dimension, especially in hospital care and in rehabilitation care, where people meet members of different professions all the time. But if you look at the GP, for instance, in a general practice, in the community nursing there, in primary care, you see lower commitment, which is very much related to less social contact with other professions. So that helps. Another thing that helps, that was discovered in Hong Kong, in a Hong Kong study, is the value of positive experiences in professional interactions and confidence in one's own professional competence. So self-efficacy was very much related to interprofessional identity formation. Interprofessional beliefs are also very important, as I said, and of course those are, the ideas are, how should I behave as a member of a mixed profession group? And this can be guided by assignments, by working together in a specific way, guided by teachers, and it's very much about leveraging each other's different priorities, different perspectives, different expertise, and to combine them. So in conclusion, interprofessional identity can be measured reliably, but also valid. It can be developed, it can be formed, it can predict very specific corresponding behaviors as related to interprofessional collaboration, and identity congruent behaviors can also be related to outcomes. And this is, of course, is very interesting because this is the ultimate goal. How can we be better together? Thank you very much. So this is the end of this small lecture with regards to interprofessional identity from a psychological perspective. I hope this information was helpful, and I hope that it can be the starting point of more synergy among professions. Thank you very much for listening, and hope to see you next time.